Good morning, Weekenders. So there is a reading overlap in the last two videos. Haley told us she was reading to page 9, but then she had passed page 9. Amanda, who was packing, had recorded, didn't have time to watch Haley's and re-record, so just gonna go like that. And because I have a lot to read, I don't get a time limit because I have a lot to read, but like half the book left. Okay. So we left off with them running around with the cat. Okay. They ran around some more till the cat got tired. He flopped down on the rug in front of the fire that burned warm. Jack and Mary slid down and wandered about. They went to the kitchen. They used the drawer handles to climb up to the counter. They walked over to a cabinet above the counter. Standing on Jack's back, Mary reached up and pulled out a cookie. They split it in half and enjoyed eating in the moonlight that spilled in through the kitchen window. They looked out on the world as it slept. Mary had fun walking around the house with Jack the Clown, but a question was buzzing in her head. Jack, did you live anywhere besides this house? Jack nodded and showed her to a plant. You live in a plant? Jack shook his head. He helped Mary climb onto the top of the pot. I can't read out loud. He pulled back the leaves. Instead of seeing the wall on the other side, Mary was surprised to see a whole kingdom. They walked among dolls, statues, stuffed animals, action figures, and all other kinds of toys. Mary was interested in them all. She played with them, and now she was Wow, I cannot read. Sorry. Mary was interested in all the toys she had played with now, and ones she had played with in the past. A Raggedy Ann doll walked past her and waved. Mary waved excitedly back to the doll she had spent every day playing with last year. Walking farther down the road, they came across a group of Barbie dolls. The dolls, just as tall as Mary, waved as she passed. Mary couldn't believe that all these toys were welcoming her into their home, just as she had welcomed them into hers. They slowly made their way up to the castle. The outside of the castle didn't do the inside justice. What had been so small outside suddenly became a large palace inside. The doors opened to a large room. On the sides, columns held up the grand arched roof. A brilliant red carpet led to the throne. On it sat a Nutcracker King. His doll wife and daughter sat in less grand chairs next to him. A little green man announced them. Announcing the return of Jack the Clown and his guest. He bowed and moved aside. Jack led Mary up to the thrones where the family sat. Ah, Jack, welcome back. What took you so long, and who is your friend? The king asked in a deep, mighty voice. The king stood 2 times as tall as Mary and spoke with a deep voice that filled the room. He wore a large red coat that was embedded with golden jewels. Hello, your majesty, Mary said, bowing slightly. My name is Mary. I'm afraid Jack can't talk because my friend dropped him on the floor and damaged his neck. What? You allowed yourself to get dropped? You know the penalty for that, don't you? He yelled. Jack just slowly nodded, his face losing its cheery looks. But it wasn't his fault. My friend picked him up and I surprised her so she dropped him. It was an accident. Mary pleaded Jack's case and he nodded in agreement. Accident or not, he was dropped. Guards! The Nutcracker King yelled. 2 Nutcracker guards came out from behind a door and dragged Jack through another. No, you can't do that, Mary cried. As for you, I suggest you go back to your world and forget all about us, the king told Mary. She shivered in her blue nightgown and was unsure about what to do. But father, the doll girl spoke, only Jack and his sister Jill can go between worlds, and she's in the other world right now. Then Mary here will have to stay here until Jack gets back, the king answered. On her way to the dungeon, Mary recalled the old nursery rhyme of Jack and Jill. Jack was a clumsy little fellow, and it only made sense that he, like the one in the story, would fall down easily. Plus his sister's name was Jill. That couldn't just be a coincidence. It seemed perfectly clear to Mary that this Jack she had met was the Jack from the rhyme. Mary was forced into a small cell. She looked around, feeling a sense of claustrophobia. Jack? She called as she noticed a figure crouched in the corner. She sat next to him and grabbed his hand. What will happen? She asked, leaning on his arm. Jack used a paper and pencil to draw a picture for her. In it she was safely asleep in her bed, and he was sitting in a pile of trash, surrounded by other broken and beat-up toys. Mary gasped as her hands flew up to her mouth. Jack put an arm around her, and they sat there for a while. You must have something to open that door, she said. He pulled out a hairpin and unlocked it. Mary ran out, but he closed it and relocked it. What are you doing? You can escape. Jack shook his head. But it's safe, Mary argued. Jack simply shook his head again. But I need you to take me back, Mary demanded when Jack refused to come. He drew a picture of a girl. You want me to find your sister? Mary asked. He nodded. But you'll die. Mary's voice was now just a whisper. Jack slowly waved as Mary retreated to the back door. Goodbye, Jack. She turned and ran straight out into the sunlight. Once outside, she walked around, asking everybody about Jill. Mary had escaped the king for now, but if she didn't find Jill soon, the king might learn she had disappeared. Mary sat down at a diner and drank some water. Heard you'd been looking for me. A girl sat across from Mary. She wasn't at all what Mary had imagined. She was no clown, but looked more like a gypsy. She had beautiful long brown hair and a soft face. She looked the complete opposite of Jack. Are you Jill? Mary asked. Yep, the girl replied. I need your help. You're a human girl, ain't you? Jill asked. Yes, I am, but that's not why I need you. What kind of trouble is he in now? My friend dropped me in— Oh, no, Jill interrupted, sitting straight up. Oh, yes. Are you telling me that they're throwing away my brother? That's him they're talking about? We have to hurry or he'll be thrown out in a matter of minutes. Before Mary could utter a sound, Jill had pulled her to her feet and they were racing to the castle. They ran through the front door unannounced and down into the dungeon. When they found Jack, he backed away from the bars, shaking his head. What's wrong with you? Jill demanded. Jack pulled out a picture he had drawn. It was easy to see that all he cared about was getting Mary to safety. There was nothing wrong with him. He was just a good friend. I'm not letting you just get thrown away like that. Now come on. We're getting you out of here. Joe began to pick the lock, but Jack held a piece of paper out from his other pocket. She looked at it and sighed. You're not serious, are you? He nodded. Let's go. Joe dragged Mary away just as some guards walked down. Mary managed to catch a glimpse of the paper. I, Joe, am in debt to Jack. This parchment allows him one free favor in return for saving my life. Signed, Joe. We can't just let him get thrown out, can we? Mary questioned as Joe led her back to the side of town. I owe him a favor, she sighed. Well, I don't. Mary yanked away from Joe's grip. Is grip a word? Or grip, sorry. I won't just go back home and let him die. He's a clown, not a hero. I love him too much. He's my friend and he wants me to be safe. The least I could do is return the favor. I won't let him throw away his life like that. Mary ran back to the castle, tears drenching her face and blurring her vision. Right before she burst into the garden, Joe grabbed her. If you want to save him, you'll need some help. So let's go get my friends. Once Jill had gathered a variety of people with her, they all mixed among the crowd, Mary hidden in a cloak. They stood there, watching as a small nutcracker, not taller than Mary's knees, read off a paper that had the names and crimes of the 5 toys standing beside him, including Jack. The man wrapped it up quickly, and a group was about to leave the toys to an extremely large trash can when Mary yelled out, revealing the presents. Their presents. People in the stands ran, and Jill's army ran out after the nutcracker's guards. Mary ran towards Jack the Clown. Jack was pushed to the ground, his hands tied behind his back as a battle erupted around them. All around her, a clash of dolls, paper and glass men, fairies, statues, and other toys fought madly against the nutcracker's army. On her way over, fighting toys bumped into her, and a couple of nutcrackers tried to grab her, but she paid them no mind as she clawed her way over to her toppled-over friend. Mary finally reached her friend, and she knelt before him and untied the rope binding his hands. The two hugged and watched as the toys continued their fight. Every time a toy broke, a carrier pigeon would pick up the pieces and carry them to what Mary hoped was a hospital. Jack got up and grabbed Mary's hand, dragging her away from the danger and into the castle, where he hoped it was safe. They walked into the main hall, but the king was waiting for them. You won't get away that easily. He summoned a lightning bolt from the sky, and Jack pushed Mary away until they were on opposite sides of the room. I'll deal with you first. The Nutcracker King turned towards Mary. Something flew out of his hand. Mary thought she was a goner, but something heavy fell on her. When she pushed it over, she was face to face with Jack. His eyes were closed, but his warm body told Mary he wasn't dead. But it didn't matter. He was unconscious, and Mary was suddenly alone with the king and no one to protect her. She closed her eyes and wished for a miracle. She felt a warm hand on her shoulder. When her shoulder became cold, Mary opened her eyes. She realized she was in her room. Mary sat up in her bed. She tried to figure out what was going on. Had she been dreaming? Had it been real? Suddenly the fog lifted and Mary remembered what had happened. "Jack!" she cried. She hastily jumped on her feet and looked at the shelf. She saw the marble white stone of Jack's pedestal. But Jack the Clown was no longer standing on his throne. Instead, there was a note. "Dear Mary, don't worry, Jack is fine. I got him out of there before he could get hurt anymore. I know he'd love it if you came by for a visit. Don't worry about trying to get over here, though. It's impossible for humans. But I promise, once Jack's feeling better, we'll come get you. It'll be soon. I promise. Joe." Okay, so that's it. Hope you liked it.